better. There is perhaps a better way for the microphone to be working. Is that better? How about now? Is the microphone working, or are we still not on the microphone? And I'm sorry about that, because I'm videoing it at the same time, and I have people watching in Russia even now that are online and making comments in Russian. So if it doesn't work, we'll do it again on the next show, and we shall see what happens in the next time. They're saying they'll read my lips, but we don't want that. And now it says they are hearing it, and that they can hear the sound. So I hope that is the case. I want you to hear the sound, and I want you to be able to see this and enjoy it. So is that the case? Are the sounds now available for us? And now it's coming in
good in every microphone you've tried.
Well, that's on the radio, JR. I'm also on the video, and so some of the video is not there. I've only got 5 viewers right now watching my live feed, and so now it's working. So now let's get to the show, okay? And I wanted to talk a little bit today about Kursk and what is happening in the war in Kursk, the region of Russia that Ukraine invaded August 6th, I want to say, that they went over there. It's been almost a month. And they were able to make some pretty good gains in the beginning in Kursk region. And there's chat about why they think it's important to go into Kursk. We've heard several different versions of why they wanted to go into the Russian territories. The first one was we wanted to have Zelensky wanted to build a buffer zone of some sort. And he wanted to put a buffer zone in between Ukraine and Russia so that, Russia couldn't just fall upon them. Well, that is kind of a ridiculous sort of reason, because if you look at when the war first started, there were arguably 3 territories, but really only 2 after 2022, because Russia had taken the Crimea in 2014. Well, in the Donbass region, which consisted of the 2 republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, that has probably 80-90% is already taken by Russia over the last couple of years. And so there already is a buffer zone of an entire republic equal to a state, the size of Lugansk and Donetsk. And so most of those have already been taken. So arguably there already was a buffer zone. Reason number 2 was, and by the way, that buffer zone is actually even larger because Kherson and Zaporizhia, which are south of the Donbass and of Donetsk, were also taken. And Russia has basically most of those, at least all the way to the Dnieper River. And so at the time that Ukraine decided to make an incursion into Kursk, there was actually some pretty strong pressure on the sides of other people in the world, Russian allies, India, China, saying, look, they want to finish this war as well. And they were pressuring Russia to begin to make some effort to resolve the dispute. And so Russia was, there were some talks about it. When you see on channels, on Telegram, on YouTube, on X, on other places, they were actually starting to discuss having, bilateral talks of some sort. We all know what happened when Zelensky decided to have his own summit without inviting Russia. How in the world do you resolve a conflict without inviting one of the parties is a bit ridiculous. And he's working on it again. Zelensky's got his own, what he calls a victory plan, Plan Победы. He has a victory plan, and that victory plan he wants to present to Biden in September. Well, that's nonsense too. You can't present a victory plan without if you're trying to resolve a dispute with someone without including them in the dispute. So I'm not sure that's going to go very well either. But what happened after Ukraine invaded the Kursk region of Russia, well, all of that talk is out the window. Any talk of having a negotiated settlement, starting to have discussions on peace talks, that is all out the window. That's not going to happen. And Russia has always believed, for quite a number of reasons, they have always believed that the only way to win in this conflict is militarily, because they have zero trust for the West. And there's a lot of history behind why, but every time the West makes a deal with Russia, it doesn't last very long, because the West doesn't do what they say, at least according to the Russians. And there's a good amount of truth to that. I'm not saying that we don't have treaties that have worked, and we don't have treaties that we do pay attention to, but there's been plenty that just change when a new person come in and want to when a new leader comes into the U.S. and changes everything. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of what happens, and it's certainly what has happened with respect to Ukraine, with respect to NATO, with respect to arms control treaties that I personally was involved in, that the U.S. has ignored after the fact. When, like, for example, when they say, well, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, they just say, well, we can put intermediate and short range missiles in Eastern Europe if we want, in former Warsaw Pact countries if we wish to, because the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. But everything that was said at the time that the collapse of the Soviet Union was that we will honor all those agreements with Russia, with the Commonwealth of Independent States, of which Ukraine was a part, and that they would do it. Well, since that time, much has changed, and I'm not saying that everybody has played fair in this event, but they haven't played fair. Certainly not from the perspective of Russia, certainly not on the NATO side. And we have completely ignored any comments, any concerns made by Russia for at least 20 years, if not 30, with respect to those and the spreading of NATO. So I like to watch videos in Russian and see what people are saying in other parts of the world. Whether you believe in my methods or not for how we do these, my methods are, I like to know both sides of the story if at all possible. There's always two sides or more to every story that you hear, and there's also plenty of propaganda to be spread around on both sides of the equation. So whenever you hear things, Republican, Democrat, I tend to listen to both. It used to be when I was a kid, you could watch the evening news and you would generally get news and facts. You know, you'd get the facts that existed. I imagine there was still a good share of propaganda, and I just perhaps didn't understand it as well as I do now. But it seemed to me that we got a lot of factual information and not as much opinion. Now it is all opinion, and that is all that we are that is all that we are bombarded with. When the title to an article is something negative or positive, clearly that's not just news and just facts. You can twist any sentence by throwing in some positive or negative language, and that occurs everywhere. And now all of our news is all politics all the time. I lived in Qatar for a good little while, 18 months, 16 months, something like that. And at that time, I started to listen to and watch Al Jazeera English. And that was far more factual and without as much opinion. And that's put on by Arab countries. You know, if you try listening to Voice of America sometime. Try listening to public broadcast systems sometime. These are alleged governmental radio stations sponsored by the U.S. government, and talk about political. You want to hear something political, put on PBS at any time and see how they twist it. Listen to Voice of America and see how they twist it. So I've kind of become a little cynical about the whole thing, and I listen to as much news as I can get from as many different sources as I can get. And I've also said, since my time as an interpreter in the U.S. Army, an interpretation is only as good as the interpreter that is interpreting for you. And there's plenty that can be missed between languages. That's absolutely true. And sometimes you don't quite get the the flavor, if you will, of the translation lost in translation. It is a fact. It does happen. For a little interpreter story, I'll give you one from many years ago during the INF Treaty. Had a young Marine. I was very young too, so I had a young Marine major who was doing the ceremonies for. We would go and we'd destroy 10 Pershing 2s. We'd go down to Texas, Tyler, Texas, out in Longhorn Army Ammunition Plant, someplace like that. And we would go and destroy the warheads, the detonators, the detonation devices, and then they would flatten the round container that housed the weapon. And the Russians got the chance to view all of that while we were doing it. And there was a major. He was a funny guy. I liked him. I liked working with these people. And but the only ones that spoke Russian, were us. There were inspectors that didn't speak Russian, and their job was to to actually do the job. And those things occur, and my job was just to interpret. So at the end of every ceremony, they like to have a nice meeting. All the, there are 8 to 10 inspectors and 8 to 10 counter inspectors. Like on the English side, there would be, U.S. side, there'd be 8 to 10 of us, and on the Russian side, there'd be 8 to 10. So a total of 20 guys, and then some local people who worked at the ammunition plant or whatever. And so afterward, there'd always be some kind of a gathering with food, a little bit of alcohol, some toasts would be done that we had worked together over the period of 2-3 weeks, and we'd have something done. And so this major, he was in charge of the whole affair for that trip, and he would say, and I told him that I have to interpret for you, and the Russian counterpart would interpret for his counterpart. And I'd say, look, he'd go, well, what are the rules? He was frightened, and not frightened, but he was worried too that something would come up. And I'd say, well, first of all, we did something called consecutive interpreting. And consecutive interpreting is, he says a couple of sentences, I interpret them. Simultaneous interpreting is what they do at the UN. And that is extremely difficult, as I've said before. And it's hard to do because you got to listen in one ear to Russian and spout out the other in English. And usually you only do that into your own language. It's hard enough to stay grammatically correct in English. And if I was listening to English and going into Russian, the likelihood of mistake is far greater than the other way around. So simultaneous interpreters, 99% of the time, translate from the target language into their own language. But with consecutive interpreting, we were a little more relaxed with that, and you could interpret either or. And so a lot of times I would interpret into Russian, especially standard things like a after elimination, after destruction of the bombs, of the missiles, after destruction, a short little speech from a major who wants to talk about it. Well, a couple of things happened that day, and I wonder if anybody could ever find the video of this, because it'd probably be pretty hilarious. It turns out that it was local news for the city of Tyler, Texas, and a local TV station showed up. And so we were being videoed, which was never the case. And so the majors freaked out. I got to tell you, I was freaked out because I'd never been in front of a camera interpreting before, and I was still fairly fresh, the INF Treaty, and my Russian was good, but it can be difficult. It can be nerve-wracking to have to interpret on the spot. And so anyway, I told the guy, well, here are the rules. The rules are, you say 2 sentences, shut up, let me translate them. Then don't give me any stories. I don't want to hear, stories about this, jokes about that. There no jokes. Jokes don't translate. I don't want to hear it. You might think you're endearing something, but you're not. They don't care. They really want to have the toast and just have a drink and everybody go from there, which is kind of cool. And so he Oh yeah, I get that. I get it. So we get out there, but that was before we knew that there were TV guys out there. And so we get out there and there's a TV crew out there and I'm like, what in the heck is this? And we're sitting up on some raised dais. There's me, there's the major, there's the interpreter from Moscow who was a colonel, he Russian colonel in their military, and then his boss who happened to be a general that came over from Russia, and they were doing the destruction for their side. And so just the four of us were up on this little dais, and everybody else was down on the bottom. Well, it was our guy to start. It was our guy's job to start in the major, and the major gets up, and I stand up next to him, and the major starts talking, and the major goes on for, I don't know, a good minute, and many sentences. He forgot he had an interpreter there, and I'm not a simultaneous interpreter, and I couldn't do it anyway. And I had to, after he was done, basically paraphrase what he said, and I'm sure it's on video somewhere, and that somebody owns it. I doubt they showed it because all the people down the front were going, "Wait, that ain't what he said." Sam says about a sentence, and the major spoke for about a minute and a half. Well, then he started with a joke, and he started telling a joke. And the only way I got through this was that I'd heard someone do this before. This is not an uncommon event. And I watched it on the other side once with Putin, too. Putin had the same thing happen to him. Lavrov had it happen a few weeks ago. And anyway, interesting interpreter story. When it comes out, this major gets up and starts telling a joke. And someone had coached me, or I'd have never gotten through it. And I can't remember who it was, but I heard this story from an Air Force guy that used to work with me. And I knew what to do when he started giving his joke. And so the Russians are out there, and I'm interpreting for them. And so he started telling his joke, and I let it go. And it was I don't remember the joke. It was some crazy joke. And I said, well, the major is starting to tell a joke, so just nod your head and smile. And so the Russians all nod their head and start to smile. And I say, okay. And then he goes on with his joke, and I said, well, he's continuing with his joke, continue to pay attention and smile. And they do that. And then he gets to the punchline, and he gets to the end, and I said, now the major has finished with his joke. A general applause, is required here. And so everybody did their general applause and started to smile. And that's how you deal, some of those interpreter stories. But the whole point of all of those things, and I know, hopefully you find my stories and stupidities interesting sometimes, but the whole point of that is, if you don't know what you're translating, or you miss the spirit of what is being said, the chances for doing something incorrect or incorrectly, or being offended, or anything like that, are fairly strong. That can happen and does happen. Some of the stories that you hear when you start with that, back when you think about the Chevy Nova, I don't know, maybe this is a stupid example too, but as far as I'm aware, Nova in Spanish means doesn't go. So you can't take a Chevy Nova to Mexico and sell it as a kind of car. You want your Chevy that doesn't go, well, buy your Chevy Nova. But that's a very popular car in the U.S., at least was many years ago. So at any rate, when I watch these, I like to watch what happens. And I have watched a lot of discussion about the Kursk invasion and about why it's important and what happens. And even Putin himself said something about the Kursk invasion not long ago. And he mentioned that, we can't deal with these type of people. Number one, who are we going to deal with? Because Zelensky isn't even a legitimate president anymore. His term expired in May of this year. And he's on... as soon as an agreement is made, as soon as the war is over, so let's say they sign an agreement to terminate the war today. Suddenly, martial law is no longer in effect, and Zelensky is no longer the president. They have to have an immediate election. They can't hold an election right now. His popularity is extremely low in Ukraine. If you listen to some of the things, if you I like to listen to a lot of Ukrainian Telegram and YouTube as well. They speaking Russian, and I like to. I sometimes get quite a bit of commentary on my channel in Ukrainian, and I have to translate it into English or Russian so that I can understand what the heck is going on. And I get quite a bit of that too. And they aren't always they are not always positive of Zelensky. I met with a person not long ago who paid $8,500 for him and his family to drive and escape Ukraine, so they could get out. And they went to Europe first, and then they went to United States. They're here in the United States, and it cost him $8,500. And his comment was, "Well, I think Zelensky really messed up, and I also think that I'm not a warrior. I am not an army person, and they're just collecting people and sending them to the front lines to die. And these are not professional soldiers. All the professional soldiers, according to much news, all the professional soldiers are already dead. And all the good units, they collected to invade Kursk. And so you can see, according to everything that you see on the news, on all news, Russian and English, even the American side is starting to acknowledge that Ukraine is not going to win this war. Something has to happen because they can't do it. The only thing you can do is escalate, and that is a huge mistake. It was a huge mistake to go into Kursk. Think about this. When this war started, there were two regions that Russia was interested in, that had referendums, that picked Russia, that said we want to be Russian. They were 90% Russian speaking. They had been living under the yoke of Ukrainian, call it terrorism, call it whatever you want, but they were being killed, abused, bombed by Ukraine from 2014 until 2022, and they had several referendums and saying they were going to the Minsk agreements were designed to freeze them in place back then and allow the Donbass region to be autonomous, to use the Russian language if they choose to let that happen. And there's so much information on this, and a lot of Americans truly did not know it when this war started. And part of my reason for doing it is to let the Russian side know that, you know what, there are some of us that know about this, and more people are finding out about how this happened and why this happened, and that we're not always the good guys. You know, I don't want to say that we're not. You know, I'm an American patriot. I served my country, and I'm very much pro-American. But that doesn't mean I'm anti-Russia, and nor should I be. And certainly I shouldn't be taken to be anti-Ukrainian, because I'm not. I feel sorry for them and for what's going on between two countries that are brothers, basically, that have always been one people, and different. You know, they had some different languages. That area has been overrun how many times over the last 1,000 years? Count it. Count how many times. Who's gone through Ukraine? How many wars have gone through Ukraine? And it's a good number. The Turks went through there. The Mongolians went through there. Genghis Khan. Add it all up. The Polish went through there. People come up from the south. Hungary went through there. There's been so many overrun in there. That is one. They like to talk of the U.S. as the what do you call it? Melting pot of the world, and that's possible. But that was intentional. People flying here and people doing it because of war and because of what happened in Ukraine. That is absolutely the case in Ukraine. And that, I believe, is something that needs to be addressed. We have two people that are very similar to each other. Now, in Western Ukraine, In Western Ukraine, there's been a history of extreme nationalism, almost to the level, well, in fact, to the level of Nazism. Many, many stories on the Russian side, on Telegram, through lots of Western publications, that when they're training, there was something not long ago in Germany that they were training Ukrainian soldiers, and when they flew there, they had patches, they had tattoos of the SS and of the swastika. And Germans were saying, get these people out of here. You know, we do not represent that. And there's a good number of these extreme nationalists who still believe that way. And it's unfortunate because it is not inclusion. That is not inclusion. And we need, you know, we're looking for more inclusion when we get to there. Hey, JR, are you with me? No, I think he left me. But he said he'd be doing some calls. I was going to see if we...
I'm here.
Dude,
You gotta give me time to get into the...
oh, that is okay. Do we need to do breaks or anything of that nature? Or can I just keep on babbling?
You got a sponsor?
Just me. just Lake Ozark Real Estate, right, JR? You're my sponsor. You're my hero. I'm getting on the YouTube channel right now. There are 17 live viewers of my program, and I'm getting a good number of commentary in English and in Russian. So thank you very much. It appears to be working, and I will make some changes for the next show as we go forward. And I wanted to keep talking a little bit about Kursk because I got something from someone this morning. One of the comments was, you don't understand, meaning me, that I don't understand why Ukraine wanted to go into the Kursk region. They wanted to take that nuclear power plant. Because up into the Kursk region, quite a bit further than where the Ukrainians got to initially, there is a nuclear power plant, and they wanted to go and take that plant, is one of the stories that has been put out as the reason to go after Kursk. Now, from my point of view, and I will definitely tell you, I'm no professional military strategist, but going into Kursk has not been a good result for the Ukrainians. According to a lot of news, I'm looking at Ukrainian news right now, Times of India, if you're interested in watching them, one of my sources for news on the YouTube channels is Times of India, and they say that just in Kursk, since the start, that the Ukrainians have lost 9,300 soldiers, well over 100 tanks, and then they list the rest of what's happened just in Kursk. And they're also taking in the eastern half of the Donbass, where the Russians have had great movement in the last month also, because Ukrainians didn't have enough to defend themselves, and then they pulled out their best troops and moved them to Kursk, alleged best troops. Now, a lot of those best troops are getting killed, and a lot of the units are being destroyed. So you'll get a lot of information about how, that Kursk effect up there, which has not helped. From my point of view, if I was a military strategist, here's what I would say. The Sergeant Trapp version would be, listen, when you go into Kursk, they also expected, according to some channels, what Ukraine expected was that some of the forces from the eastern Donbass region would have to be removed from there to go to Kursk to protect it. And in the initial days, they took probably 100, they call them conscripts, and these are, I don't want to say they're not professional soldiers, they are, but they're young soldiers who are still in school, who are basically guards on the border. You know, they aren't the heavily trained soldiers, which they are in the eastern half of the Donbass on the Russian side right now. And so they captured, the Ukrainians captured at least 100. of these younger men who were victims of the aggression into Kursk. Well, they thought that that would mean that Putin and his generals would have to reevaluate and pull everyone out of Donbass and move them up to Kursk. Kind of foolish thinking, in my opinion, because the Russian military they haven't even begun to get into the need for a second mobilization. There's talk of it, but they haven't had to do it yet. They've had so many young men join voluntarily that, and I don't know the true numbers. I'm not sure that anybody does, and what the true numbers are that are going on the Russian side. But the numbers that Russia is putting out, and that truly some of the Western think tanks are backing up, the reasonable number for what Ukraine has lost is well over 600,000 young men, an entire generation. And so I think whoever planned or plotted this Kursk invasion ought to have his head examined. And that's coming from a guy. It's pretty sad if Sam, the former military sergeant, is a better military strategist than General Sirski. You know, it just seems the reasoning behind it doesn't equate to the limited success that it gained them. There was some talk that going into the Kursk region was more of a political stunt, a media blitz, that they wanted to show that they had to show some success. It had been so long since Ukraine had shown any success in anything that there wasn't much to talk about. And every day there are plenty of stories about Russian advances in Donbass, Russian advances on the eastern half. And these Ukrainian generals, Ukrainian politicians, they needed a victory of some sort. So if you can go into Kursk, that's a good thing. Now, Kursk, on the other side of Kursk, is the Kharkiv region of Ukraine. Okay, now this is my thought process on this. Now, I've already told you that I don't think I know that there's not going to be a negotiated settlement of this anytime soon. There will be a military resolution, and the Russians have been saying that for a couple of months now. And even before the Kursk incursion. And like I said, there was a good number of, a good amount of pressure from other countries, allies of Russia, to say, hey, you really need to perhaps engage in some kind of a political resolution of this. Start doing some communication. There's been zero communication between the West and Vladimir Putin already for a year and a half, 2 years. The last time anyone spoke was in April of 2022. How in the world are you going to resolve a conflict? If Joe Biden had any brain left at all, he would attempt to resolve something. And if Kamala Harris was smart, she would say something. You at least have Trump saying, I'll end this war in a day. Between the time I'm elected and the time I take office 2 months later, this war will be resolved. Truthfully, I believe that can happen. But it's not going to be an agreement between Zelensky and Putin. It's going to be an agreement between the West, led by the United States, and Putin. There's no question anymore that this is not a Ukrainian war. This is not a Ukraine-Russia dispute. This is a dispute between America and NATO and Russia, not Ukraine and Russia. And, people ask questions like, well, gee, how come you don't just put Ukraine into NATO? Read up on that. You'll find out that they wanted to be in NATO already 10 years. And the reason they can't is because they're so corrupt. And you have to have a legitimate government before you can get in there. And they had people who had overthrown the government, and that they didn't have the processes and the background that NATO desired to have Ukraine in. And you've heard this even since the 2-year part. Well, let's just turn them in NATO. You put them into NATO, everybody suddenly has to defend them. Well, yeah, but that doesn't make them any less corrupt. They're still extremely corrupt. And until you deal with those issues, you can't be accepted into NATO. And a few countries have said they're never going to be, we're never going to approve them into NATO anyway. One of the biggest one is Russia. Russia has said, Vladimir Putin has said, at least since 2001, they will never be a member of NATO. And I like listening to the speeches of Lavrov. There's a Russian-speaking journalist from England, and he got the opportunity to interview Lavrov a month or two ago. And I watched that interview, and Lavrov gets up and goes, how come you guys never talk about the war? You act like this war started in 2022. How come you never talk about the things that occurred prior to that? You never show the bombing of schools and of hospitals by Ukraine from 2014 to 2022. You only show mistaken or errant bombs that might have occurred. And really, sometimes they're Ukrainian and sometimes they're Russian. But you want to beat us up for those type of things, but you never tell the truth about what happens on the other side. Those are very interesting to watch in Russian. And he goes, and Lavrov tells this British journalist, just says, well, I'm not gonna play into that game. He speaks very much like Trump. I'm not gonna play these games where you get me to say something that we feel sorry that we bombed a hospital in Kiev, when we, number one, don't think we bombed the hospital in Kiev, and number two, the only reason you want me to feel sorry for the people that lost their lives there is so that you can turn it around and say that I admit that what we did was kill children. And number one, we don't admit that. And number two, when are you going to talk about it from the other point of view? Now, I don't know who's right. My only point in telling you all this is the flag-waving people that run around and think that there isn't enough blame to go around everywhere in this scenario, and a great deal of it on the U.S. itself, are truly missing the boat. And it would be very nice if people were truthful about this. You don't hear enough. The only one you've heard on the campaign trail talk about this, Trump gives the Trump standard, which is, I could end that war in a day. You know what? I'd love to be a part of that. And my Russian is good enough. You hire me, I'll help you settle that thing in a day. I'd be happy to go over there and do that. And I have the experience, and my Russian is fantastic. If you believe it or not, do I still make grammatical errors? Sure do. But I understand, and I'd love to work in that sort of realm. But Trump has this will be done in a day. You know what? It's very possible he could set an outline for what it is. Kamala Harris hasn't said a word about any of this. You could expect more of the same from her. You could expect more pressure. The $60 billion that they gave, or they sent to this conflict back in, when was that? January, February, when they finally approved and got that money through with a bunch of morons. I shouldn't call people morons, but a bunch of very political lovers of war, which are all over America and are higher levels of government, and they're dishonest about it. They don't tell you the truth. They just get on TV and go, "We need to defend Ukraine democracy." Well, good luck finding democracy in Ukraine. Okay, good luck with that. It doesn't exist. Not like I'm not even so sure it exists in America anymore, to be truthful. So, I'm definitely twisted in that regard, but it certainly doesn't exist in Ukraine. And it drives me crazy to see these people waving Ukrainian flags, putting them on the bumper of their cars, wearing, lapel pins with crossed U.S. and Ukraine. And I'm not anti-Ukraine, but I'm certainly against U.S. military being involved in a Ukrainian conflict that has very little to do with America. And people don't understand this. This is yet another American incursion to a place where they don't need to go to take resources. And you know what? I'm a good, strong military almost retiree. I believe in our military. I believe in our system. I don't believe in the people running the system, but I do believe in the system. And I think there's plenty of bad people to go around here. And it's a bit depressing to me that we're in that sort of a scenario. So the final part on the Kursk invasion, I said something about this the other day in Russian, and there was a good amount of commentary about it. Here's the unfortunate, what I call almost a likelihood. If it was me as Putin, if it was me on the side that is beginning to make great gains in the Donbass regions and in the eastern half of Ukraine, and if it was me who knew that Ukraine was losing like they're losing everywhere and has an extreme shortage of soldiers that is clear, I'm not so sure that I wouldn't keep on trucking. And so right now, when this started, Russia said, we're going to take the Donbass, which is two areas, basically. The Donbass is Donetsk and Lugansk. Those two, basically right now, are 80 to 90% already taken. And if they get into Pokrovsk, the city, the fairly large city that Ukraine is evacuating even now, if they get into there, the likelihood of those two republics of Ukraine, those two small oblasts, regions of Ukraine, those are gone. Just like Crimea, gone. Good history on that. But now, after the agreement that was signed in Istanbul in 2022 in April, and Boris Johnson went over there and destroyed that, said, no, you don't need to do that. We'll support you to the end, Zelensky. You're going to win militarily. That's kind of a joke. No, I can't believe he actually believed that. If he did, again, their experts are not really experts. They're just telling you what you want to hear. Experts, you can hire an expert to say anything. I practiced law for a long time. You can always get a Russian speaking expert to say one thing contrary to another Russian speaking expert. And so that's not quite an expert if all you're telling people is what they want to hear. But now the regions of Zaporizhia and the regions of Kherson, which are a little bit to the south of the Donbass area, which is already gone, are fully under Russian control. They're already gone. And they had referendums, too, to say, we want to be with Russia. Well, the mistake is going to be to take the rest of the Zaporizhia region, and then, unfortunately, they'll probably, if it was me, I'd take Odessa. I'd go into the Odessa region, do the same thing, and connect with the, I forget what it's called, Transnistria, which is connected to Moldova. There's a little sliver of Moldova that broke off from Moldova. They're Russian-speaking, and they attach themselves to Russia. So a sliver of Russia over there. If you take Odessa, you connect those, and Transnistria is all connected. I would take that. I would take the Sumy region, and I would take Kharkiv. And that is, unfortunately, far more likely because Ukraine made an incursion into Kursk. And that possibility before was very remote. Many of the things I've already told you and already said, I'm not alone in saying them. You can watch, Jeffrey Sachs has said a lot of the same things, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and I've known about him for a long time, but I haven't watched a lot of his shows in a while. And he's a historian of Eastern Europe and of Russia and a professor, of course. And I watched something of his not long ago, and I was pleasantly surprised that he thinks almost identically to the way that I do. And I'm like, well, geez, here's an actual genius, and not just some sergeant, former interpreter for the U.S. Army. who happened to do some pretty cool stuff and has some very strong opinions on it. But I'm nobody special. I watched. I watched the collapse of the Soviet Union. I watched the Commonwealth of Independent States and the horror story of the '90s for the Russians, and I paid good attention to that, and didn't really enjoy what was going on even then. I didn't like it. I've had a few comments on here about they want me to translate this into Russian from my video channel. We still have 12 viewers right now, people that are viewing me, most of them from the Russian side, listening in the English. People want to practice their English sometime as well. If you get a chance, you might go watch some of the Times of India, where they talk about the Kursk region. Some of those are on YouTube. The gentleman Apti Alaudinov, who is one of the commanders that is currently responsible on the Russian side for getting rid of, driving the Ukrainians out of the Kursk region. He does an almost daily statement, and a lot of these things on YouTube you can translate from English to Russian, at least the subtitles, and you can listen to those. And he has his own channel that he's built, and he puts out some of the news of what's occurred every day. I watch a lot of Telegram and try to get some of the news from there. As I alluded to a little bit on Tuesday in our first program, Ukraine is attempting to outlaw Telegram. And part of the reason for that is the news isn't good on Telegram for Ukraine. So here's a lot of what's happening is the Russian soldiers have their cell phones, and they're taking videos of themselves putting up Russian flags somewhere, and then posting it on Telegram. And so the people of Ukraine are getting upset about this. I mean, they're losing all their people. They're losing the land. They haven't had anything successful to talk about in a while, except US F-16s coming and escalating the war more. But we lost one of those not long ago, right after they first came up. And they had a battle on Telegram about that, in fact, because there's stories that the F-16 was actually blown up by a Patriot system. Now, the Pentagon came out and said that that's impossible. They have a friend or foe system involved in Patriot. I thought there was something similar. I don't know if it really works all the time or who knows. There's been several different explanations about how that F-16 went down, but Ukraine doesn't want to answer those questions. They don't want bad news going out to their people or anywhere else. Plus, Telegram has been used by many of the region, private people, for example, to show the Russians where the Ukrainian forces are holed up. And there's plenty of stories about how well the Russian military has been Russian military intelligence specifically has been used in this conflict. That their military intelligence is just stellar, and their collection and jamming, which is something that I did in the military. My job technically, and I didn't do it. I turned out to be an interpreter on the arms control side, but I did training to be a collection and jamming professional interpreter. So our job in wartime would be to listen to enemy traffic in Russian, in my example, and to use military intelligence to jam their radio signals, to interfere with their communications, to listen and find out where they were going, and I was a collection and jamming expert. And according to all news, the Russian collection and jamming and military intelligence on the ground has been completely stellar and very, very good the entire war, and only getting better. And so I think that is a key and critical part of any war. And if Telegram is outlawed in Ukraine, then maybe the Russians won't be able to use the Telegram channels to their benefit. And so that, I think, is very interesting, because we want to talk about how we're protecting democracy in Ukraine. You know, you get Biden getting up there and going, "We're protecting democracy." Oh, really? How do you define this democracy? Why don't we talk about martial law that's occurring over there right now, and then tell me about democracy? Why don't we just start with that, and we can keep on going and keep on about who gets all the money and where it's all going, because there are plenty of stories about where the money is going on both sides of the ocean, by the way. So this money that the U.S. is just pumping and funneling into Ukraine is not necessarily as helpful as it ought to be, because it's not going to where it was intended to go. Sorry about that. Got a little camera issue. And I got the sun. I'm avoiding the sun on the video. So sorry about that. I know half of you are on the radio program, and I love that. And I plan to get this a little better organized for the next time we do this. What I'm going to do, and I want to give a station announcement, that we are on damradio.com, damradio.com, and you can listen live on there. JR is going to put me down as one of the hosts on there, and you can go and read my bio on that website. And you can also listen live to other wonderful shows on the station, including Jonathan Hartenstein's. He's very politically motivated, and I will try to pay attention to international events. I want to repeat that I'm an international traveler. I've been to 51 countries in all 50 states. And I try to keep my eyes and ears open when I hear things about what's going on. I very much appreciate other points of view. Will never cram my point of view down your throat. You can take my words or leave them. Doesn't bother me either way. I'm going to say the same thing, regardless of who's asking. I'm not a person who's going to intend my audience or pick and choose my audience and change my words based on that audience. I must admit that if I was in a military audience, I'd probably swear a little and throw some bad words around, but generally not. I'm pretty well behaved on the radio, and I like to say things. I plan to get a little better organized and have some, we're still experimenting, because I'm the only one broadcasting remotely and doing a dual video at the same time. So sometimes there's going to be a bit of a disconnect between the two. And what I'm also trying to create is another version, another channel, if you will, similar to what Damn Radio has, in Russian. And I will be the first host on that. And then I plan to find some other and create a Russian-speaking channel. There are so many Russian-speaking individuals in South Florida, in all of Florida. They are all over. And I get plenty of commentary from those people on my Russian-speaking channel. There are hundreds of thousands. Ukrainians, Russians, people from Eastern Europe that spoke Russian in their youth and in their homes, former Soviet republics. I work with quite a number of these people, which keeps my Russian fresh and keeps my Russian up to date. I have a little trouble with slang, especially with the younger generation and watching some Russian TV, but it's going to... someone just made a comment that I need to try to keep my camera steady. Well, I was doing it, but then it wasn't heard correctly. So the next time it's going to be very steady, and I'm going to correct all this. And I'm going to recommend that JR, for his channel, put a video in there as well. That's very popular these days, is for multiple platforms to be working at once. The intent of this is to be on JR's radio station, damradio.com, to expand that both for both of us, for him and for me, and to also expand knowledge of the issues for mid-Missouri, for southern Florida in my case, and mid-Missouri. I still have plenty of family there. And bring some attention, some much-needed attention to what the U.S. Is doing. Generally, JR and I have similar beliefs about a lot of things. We're very open about the places where we don't agree and the things that we don't agree with. One of them, not too long ago, was and JR, please stop me if you no longer disagree, or if your disagreement has grown in some way. But JR doesn't necessarily, or hasn't necessarily, agreed with my thoughts on term limits. And I think it's important in relation to, especially with what's going on in Ukraine. Think about this. In the U.S., our term limits, for at least for the president, came about in 1953, 56. And that people didn't want. People didn't want that. Now, last time I had a discussion with JR about this, he said, and with a couple other people that he happened to be with and agreed with his point of view, was that we want professional politicians in these spaces. Now, it kind of goes against some of the things I say as far as Vladimir Putin, because Vladimir Putin's been in power now for 23 years, something like that, and he's going to be in charge until 2030. He's still going to be there. And he's been in power for a long time. Well, what you get when you have people in power for a long time is a steady political soul, I guess you'd call it. Steady political movement going in the same direction with the same goals for a good long time. And I've said for many years now that what I appreciated about the Soviet Union and about China as well, they're also a communist, was that they think differently than we do. They have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 30-year plan, a 100-year plan. And they may call them different things in different ways, but they do have them. And they have these goals that go on forever. Our goals are very short term. When Joe Biden can come in on day one and sign however many executive orders he signed and terminate every program that Trump had, every method of dealing with issues that Trump had, with the stroke of a pen, how in the world are you going to get the rest of the world to believe in us or support in us or want to be our partners? It's extremely difficult. So although I still believe that term limits are necessary, maybe on the president's side, I'd actually be one of the other ones. Now, I support them as well, even at the judicial level. In fact, I think they're especially sensitive at the judicial level. And that's almost heresy to say something like that, especially for a person who has a Juris Doctorate like me. I went to law school. I practiced law for a long time. You can read stories about me. They're everywhere. JR knows them. And I'll debate anybody about them anytime. You know, that's another topic for another day. And I do plan to go there, and I plan to tell you all about it. You want to read about me? Supreme Court, United States, Samuel Trapp versus state of Missouri. Go check it out. Ended in 2022, 21, can't remember. But cost me a lot of money, went all the way. Wouldn't change it for a bit. And you can have a look at that. And one of my big beefs is that, especially at the Supreme Court level, Supreme Court of Missouri, I have emails from people working on the Judiciary Committee in our state is that I got an email from one of the members of the committee that said, we all know the Supreme Court of Missouri is corrupt. I very quickly typed back and said, well, I wasn't the one that said that. But now that you mention it, you know, it does seem a bit odd that they won't do this and they won't do that, and the way decisions are made, are very, very political at the Supreme Court level, both at state level and at the national level. And I'd like to see it done a different way. I also believe that on the judiciary there should be term limits. Why not? Because why wouldn't you be able to have an age limit? Okay, now the popular thing for presidents to do is appoint judges to the Supreme Court at the youngest age they can come up with to make sure that they stay around as Republicans or Democrats for the longest time possible. I think that why wouldn't our system is not sacred. Our system can be changed. Like we changed term limits for president because we didn't want emperors and kings. We wanted somebody who's going to be limited. Why wouldn't we want to do that on the judicial level to get out these people who stick around past their welcome? Why wouldn't we want younger voices? Why would we want everyone to be over the age of 80 or over 70, whatever? Why can't we pick an age that it's time to retire from government service? I think it's necessary. When you look at especially on our legislative level with these people, oh my God, these people have been there. Joe Biden, 50 plus years. Nancy Pelosi, forever. Chuck Schumer, always. The goon on the other side, McConnell, oh my God, why in the world are these people still there? Why can't we get rid of them? Well, we can't because their power is so embedded. And it's more important to have the power. So nothing ever changes. Our system will never change. How come there's no national referendum for term limits? How come nobody's talking about that? I heard something mentioned on the Trump side, said he was thinking about it, said he might propose something. I think you ought to make it. People argue that it's not the elected officials as well. This is another argument you hear, that it's only the elected officials that can fight with the embedded career bureaucracy. So you get these people who have served in the government, call it, I don't know what, Department of Labor. They are now and pick any one of them, doesn't matter, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Immigration, you pick it, any federal, Dr. Fauci on the Department of Health, something like that, right? And think about these people. They're there for life. You never get rid of them. What is wrong with limiting the length of time that those people can serve to a certain age or a certain number of years? So if you're going to get in and destroy the country, if you're going to get in and use the government as a weapon, everybody on the Democratic side and sometimes on the Republican side too, the longer you stay, the more likely it is you're going to be able to use the government as your own personal weapon. And that is what they're doing. The government has used a weapon today. You want to be targeted in the state of Missouri? I got news for you. There are people who can target you, especially on the licensing board. If they want to come after you, got news for you, they will. And there are other people they will protect. You want to talk about the Missouri bar? Don't get me started. You want to talk about some corruption? Oh, baby. And lawyers are the worst of it all. Now, some people may not want to hear that kind of thing, but got news for you. Shakespeare, what did he tell us? Start with the lawyers, kill all the lawyers. No, I don't agree with that, obviously. There's a lot of good people out there. But judges, they shouldn't be there for life. There is no reason they should be there for life. Very good explanation that you get in high school civics class and as you go forward into law school or something like that about why it's so important that these people get to serve for life. I always have discounted those arguments and said, those arguments really are BS and they don't make a lot of sense. You want to have people appointed for life. Why? You want to have them appointed for life so that they aren't influenced by the president that appointed them or the legislative branch that pays them. That's nonsense. And they don't want their decisions affected by the politics. Well, once you're appointed, they can't touch you anyway. You can still make them untouchable, but make them untouchable only for a period of time. What's wrong with putting them out there 10, 12 years and sending them out to pasture? bringing in new voices, bringing in new thought processes, so you don't get clogged arteries at certain court levels, at the appellate level in whatever circuit. Pick a circuit, somebody that's going to sit there for 30 years, or the whole group of them, even worse, for 30 years. They should change far more frequently, and you should bring in some younger voices, although they try to appoint all these younger voices now so they can sit there until they're dead. And so that it can be the same group of corrupt. Assume you get a corrupt one. Then what? The corrupt person is going to sit out there for how long? You get a corrupt one that is willing to play. Well, that corrupt one can sit there forever, because you don't have any limitation mechanism of how it works. So the arguments for keeping people eternally in power, I disagree with at all levels. Our founding fathers intended government service to really be service. It was more of a punishment than a career choice. Think about this. What if you punished billionaires who've been very successful in life and made them serve as the head of Department of Commerce? You know, there's talk, JR was saying something in the last hour about Elon Musk doing something. I forget what he was going to do, but he was going to talk about the economy somehow and have a review of I think it was a review of government expenditures and government agencies and things of that nature. How awesome would that be to have someone who's a business person look at these agencies, which are so fat? They are fat, and they are run with money. I remember 30 years ago being in charge of a small budget for an aviation brigade, and the things that come across my desk to go look at, and the commander, a major, would say, Sergeant Trapp, have a look at these, and see what you can do to spend this money. He'd come to me in June or July and say, we still have all this money to spend for training and for all these things. You have to spend it by September 30th. So please, we haven't spent enough. Go spend all this money. And you'd go look at it. It'd be a ton of money. A ton of money sitting there and go, why do we have to spend it? Here's my question, young, foolish Sam. Why are we spending this money? And he'd say, well, because if we don't spend it, we don't get it next year. Nor do we get our, whatever the increase is, 3%. But if you're not spending what you have each year, you can't get more the next. Well, that's how government gets bloated and fat. And the longer that people stay in the same positions in the same offices, they just get used to it. And that's how they spend. So you got to clean house at all levels, management levels for every agency. Cut them off. You can't serve. You must retire after 20 years. Go do something on your own. And go start your own business. You want to be a consultant somewhere? Great, but you're not running the government anymore. Get out. Take your punishment. Take your, just like every person should have a military experience. I didn't believe that when I was younger, but I pretty much believe it now. What's wrong with having a 2-year, a 1-year sentence to serve your country in the military? They're having a really hard time getting soldiers now. I have some theories on that as well. I believe it's because you got, commanders in dresses, male commanders in dresses. And I know I don't want to be inspected by a commander in a dress. If I'm standing there all ship-shape and showing off my uniform, that's all I need is some man in a woman's dress in a uniform coming out and inspecting me. I can't imagine I could stay serious with that. I would have an extremely hard time doing that. And I'm not anti whatever you want to do in your private time. You go right ahead. But when you step out into public, you need to put on your public persona, and your public persona shouldn't be that way. And I think that has caused us some problems. And so if you're going to force people to be part of the military, maybe you should adjust how you're doing it. I could go into stories about don't ask, don't tell, which was what was in place when I was in the military. And you could go into what occurred before that, where it was illegal and you would be dishonorably discharged if people discovered that you were an alternate lifestylist, things of those nature. In Ukraine, they have had these sorts of DEI initiatives in their military too. This is how you get accepted. This is how you continue to get U.S. money. You come out publicly and say, well, we're all for DEI in the military as well. Well, you're not going to find that in Russia. You're just not going to find that in Russia. And there's some good comments that are being posted on my channel here. The people want. One of my favorites is in Russian. One of my favorite movies is called Brat Dva. Brat Один и Brat Dva. Brat means brother. And there's two movies in the 90s. A young man named Sergei Bodrov did these movies. And recently, I was in Russia, and I went to the place. He was killed in an avalanche, and his entire filming crew was killed in an avalanche in 2002. But in the 90s, he was very popular. He was in movies like Brat, Brother 1, Brother 2, and Sisters. He was in those, plus several others. And he was a young, producer coming up with his own movies. And he died. Well, one of my favorites is in Brother 2, he comes to Chicago and attempts to help a Russian hockey professional who was being fooled by an American attorney, American consultant that was taking his money and had him sign English contract, and he didn't know what he was signing. He was inexperienced, but he was great at hockey, so he wasn't getting any of his money. So one of the famous parts of the movie is when Sergei Bodrov, who's comes over, his name is Daniel in the movie, and Daniel comes over and gets up to the consultant's office in downtown Chicago, has a gun with him, sits down and grabs a shot of vodka, pours some vodka to the criminal that stole the hockey guy's money, pours one for himself, and his brother, who's older than him, his brother a couple nights earlier had told him that he was going to stay in America. He was there with him. He said, "Look at all the power. What constitutes power is basically the question. And the question in Russian is, в чем сила? Where do you get power, basically? This is important." Oh, JR's getting ready to cut me off. And the answer to that question is power comes from right, pravda. So power comes from right. People, I appreciate you listening to me and listening to this show. It's been a great event. I will try to correct this. JR, does that mean I'm done? Hello? I'm not sure if he's still playing or not. I don't know if he mistakenly pushed something. But I'm keeping on with the video, and hopefully we will still be able to hear the recordings, hear everything on Damn Radio. I'm not simulcasting, so I can't really see it. I appreciate all your time. We're going to stop at the hour and a half mark today, and we're going to prepare it a little bit more for the next time. Get my equipment a little more ready. We're going to have some discussion with JR with how it goes. If you're watching me on YouTube, I appreciate your likes. I appreciate your liking my channel and spreading the channel so that people can listen to it. This is, of course, the English version. I do plenty in Russian, and I plan to do that. And I will try to get this with subtitles in Russian very soon, so that you can at least read it. And I plan to do repeats in the Russian language. So thank you all for listening. My name is Samuel Trapp. I am the evil Russian-speaking American. Злой русскоговорящий американец — это и я. И я планирую это сделать еще раз по YouTube. Thank you very much for all of your likes and for spreading my channel. And that's all I have, JR. Thank you very much.